The exhibition came about through the desire really to show older works within the collection in a new context. The idea to draw out works that talked about homes, housing, an environment, or in some cases an escape from an environment, and coupling those up to works of invited contemporary working artists that were addressing similar themes. The inspiration really came largely from Donna Franklin's art-science crossover with her botanical artwork, and this formed the impetus really to create a show around the ideas of the home, the environment, colonisation, all those kinds of issues that are really exemplified in this artwork installed at the entrance. So we enter the exhibition through this garden of the future alongside Claire Bushby's samplers as a welcome home, if you like. Donna Franklin originally installed a garden like this for her PhD exhibition in this gallery, and I was struck by that idea of this installation that occupied the space so convincingly, and I asked her to do a version of that for this exhibition because it absolutely personifies what we're talking about in this exhibition, which is describing the home, but not just the home. It's about how we create an environment wherever we go. So Donna's brought these plants in much the same way as the colonisation of Australia. So the native vegetation is largely removed and we bring in the imported vegetation and create a natural environment out of that. So there's a really soft irony about how we modify the environment and how we name that environment in the process. So this is really beautifully offset by the project home of Andrew Gaynor. The artist's impression only, which is what we see in newspapers when we're looking at project homes going up in housing developments in outer suburbs, for example. That whole notion of developers going into an area and creating an entirely new suburb, clear-felling native bushland, native animals disappear, and we recreate an environment that's imported. Even the vegetation is imported, and a whole new ecosystem, if you can call it that, is created through that process. It doesn't moralise necessarily, but it does invite us to really deeply consider how the environment is impacted in this way. As part of this entry statement, Claire Bushby's works are ostensibly traditional samplers using cross-stitch on fabric, and we often see works like this as a welcome to a home as an entry statement. In this case though, the works are subverting tradition by drawing on tweets. For example, "Be right back, gonna hang myself to see if you only live once." So these are actual tweets that Claire has engaged with over time, and this is part of a bigger project that's seen Claire collaborating with many artists. So it's a really nice irony of tradition and subversion. Joanna Lamb's work, Framed View 2, a traditional oil painting in a non-traditional format in which she describes that view of the suburbs that we see quite commonly, the backs of cars through gates. And this is juxtaposed with Gina Moore's painting called The Smell of Freedom. Again, this is a suburban view of high-rise flats of the era, but The Smell of Freedom is actually the full tank of petrol and the promise of getting away from it all for a while. And aligned with that then too is a work by Marcus Beilby, one of Perth's foremost photorealists, and this is a view of the back streets of Fremantle. It's talking about a late night rendezvous. This trio of works talks about a sense of escape from the suburban environment, if you like, in one form or another. Stuart Elliott's very compelling installation of paintings with the originating objects of facilities. So when we're talking about things being home and being housed, these facilities, there are elements of the housing about them, but what they're housing is not necessarily human life. It might be something a little more sinister. Very true to that industrial aesthetic, and the models that are mounted on the plinths there, along with the paintings, are very much a part of Stuart Elliott's signature work. Liz Murruffo talks in these works, it's a triptych self-portrait that talks about her place of origin or her ancestry. Born in the USA, she's of Mexican descent, and the painting here actually draws on the iconography of the Mexican heritage that she's referencing. She's moved all over the world in her life, but still draws on those originating ancestral kinds of premises. Thomas Hoareau, this painting is approximately 30 years old, and I'm struck by its contemporary relevance. The scene that's shown is that of a building site, of infill apartment building, and this is a site that we can see even 30 years later. This is almost exactly the kind of site that we see all over Perth, with the current push to building more housing and more high-rise building for high-density inner-city living. The person lying in the large Hoareau drawing is really a metaphor for life. We can read that in a number of ways depending on our context. Some might read it as a death, others might read it as a potential kind of metamorphosis. Alongside that is Ron Nyisztor's work, actually showing the building blocks, and these two works have a synergy because of the way they're put together. One is the wholesale building environment, the demolition and then the restructuring, the rebuilding, and Ron Nyisztor's work is the raw material, the component part of the overall structure. When we're speaking about the home and our environment, our lived experience of that environment, we move into Vanessa Russ's series of 6 works on paper that talk about her memories of home. She no longer lives in this area but visits there frequently to see her family. Tom Albert's long-term established Western Australian artist. The collection holds 3 of his significant works. The one shown here is of an interior, a very sombre depiction, quite lonely in a way, but a very introspective space. Alongside that is the work of a very recent graduate from Edith Cowan University, Bunbury campus, the visual arts there. Sarah Mills has just completed her honours year, and this is one of the paintings from her honours presentation. Mark Datodi, an ECU graduate also. This installation references a road map, for example, in one of the pieces, and the suggestion of building materials, roofing structure in the other piece. It's a compelling piece of work, especially when read in tandem in this way. Joan Ross is a practicing artist from the East Coast, and this video work is the first video acquisition for the ECU art collection called Colonial Grab. It talks about how we've colonised Australia and created a different environment to the one that we found. She references the resources boom in the heavy use of high-vis clothing, which is almost the new camouflage, if you like. It is so common. And she references those old colonial iconographic images of Glover and Lycett in their artworks and uses those to create the Ikebana kind of garden by deforesting areas and using that vegetation as decoration for the Ladies Project. It's a poignant and also quite humorous work that, when read in tandem with Clive Barstow's colonial jigsaw, produces a really fascinating and ironic narrative. Clive Barstow's jigsaws reference a number of different elements, including Disney characters and processes of globalisation. So it's about colonisation, but it's pulled into a contemporary context. So the jigsaws then are a really nice metaphor for the way things are pieced together and become naturalised in a new format. So the Disney characters are in the environment with the big Mack truck that's altering the environment in the same kind of fantasy way that the Disney characters themselves are created. Backgrounding those works is a long-standing work by Susanna, a map of Australia that shows that process of naming as part of the claiming of the land. So the original vegetation is obliterated and names are given to areas that were previously named by the nation's first people and now are renamed with imported names from the colonisers' original homes. And that takes us back to the entrance statement of Donna's garden, which is a really nice juxtaposition of those two elements that communicate those ideas. Our second video work showing in this exhibition is by Eva Fernandez and Rebecca Cornock, a collaboration between the two artists. It's a compelling video that talks about Ernesto and his family who migrated from Italy in the late 1920s, and how generations of his family have maintained a property in Maylands. One of the last of the original old families that built their own home over many years, that grew their own vegetables, and in Ernesto's case, actually made saddlery and carts by hand. It's a poignant video with an utterly moving audio component that has Ernesto talking about his family and how they built this beautiful old home themselves. And all around, the property developers are converting old properties into duplex, triplex and multi-storied housing for high-density living. As the curator of this exhibition, my aim was to bring out long-standing works from the permanent collection that don't always get seen in a particular context. They're usually part of the storage facility, or they might hang in a hallway or a meeting room. And when they're put into a new context in a gallery and they're juxtaposed with other works, they tell a new story and they're seen for what they once communicated and what they can communicate again. It has an overall narrative, but within that, sections that tell individual stories. I think the exhibition has done that quite successfully.